Action.
Hello, hey, hi. I'm Steph, chef, and this is Crochet and Creepy, where I tell you something creepy and make you something cute. So this is the Sekhmet sweater that I was working on in episode 1. It was only to here when I was working on it then, and now it is finished and wonderful. I did this little sleeve detail also on the bottom that comes from the yoke. This one is super comfy and delicious, and you can find others like it in my Etsy shop that you can order, and I will link that down below. So today, while I regale you with tales of the creepy, I will continue picking away at my Stash Buster blankie. I added just a tiny little bit of this blue color, and let's get going. So today I'm going to tell you about Velma Barfield. She is an interesting one, I think, because you can kind of look at her life and pinpoint one event in her life where everything started to change for her. So she was born Margie Velma Bullard, but everybody called her Velma, and the first place my mind goes to is Scooby-Doo. So Velma was born on either the 23rd or 29th of October in 1932. I found both dates sort of all over in my travels on the internet, so I decided just to tell you both of them. Either way, it makes her a Scorpio. She was born in South Carolina, but grew up in North Carolina, and that is where she spent most of her life. Her parents were Lillian and Murphy Bullard, and Velma was the second of their 9 children. 9. I just can't even imagine. Apparently, Murphy was a really strict father, and Velma had to do a lot of the household chores. According to Velma, Murphy could also be abusive with her, and her mother, Lily, just let it happen, and Velma resented her for that. So growing up, it sounds like she had a bit of a rougher upbringing. She had harsh parents, lots of siblings, they weren't very well off, and Velma had to do a lot of manual labor. In high school, Velma met a boy named Thomas Burke, and they started dating and eventually fell in love. When Velma was 17 years old, Thomas asked her to marry him, and Velma got permission from her begrudging father to marry him, so she dropped out of high school and ended up becoming Mrs. Thomas Burke. So Thomas worked various jobs to support them, and he didn't really want Velma to work, so she stayed home, which would not fly with me, but different time. So Thomas and Velma settled into their new life together, and pretty soon they had 2 children together named Ron and Kim. Velma really loved being a mom. She was that mom that would always volunteer to be involved in school functions, so her kids really loved that about her. So for a while, they had a pretty good life. Thomas was working and providing for their family, and Velma was raising their kids and loving it. But everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Okay, so Velma needed to get a hysterectomy for her health, and after that surgery is pretty much when everything changed for her. She ended up becoming very depressed and getting hooked on pain pills. Also around that time, Thomas started drinking pretty heavily, which caused really big arguments between him and Velma. She really did not approve of his drinking. Thomas also ended up getting in a car crash and losing his job, which only made matters worse. So one day, Thomas was home by himself. Velma and the kids were out. I think they were probably at school, and Velma was at the laundromat. And when they all got home, the house had burned down, and Thomas was still inside, so he died of smoke inhalation. So Velma and her kids moved back in with her parents so she could get back on her feet after losing Thomas. By now, her kids were pretty much grown, though. Ron had graduated high school, so they weren't little kids anymore. Not too long after Thomas's death, Velma met her next husband, a man named Jennings Barfield. Jennings had also just recently lost his wife, so they could comfort each other in that way. So Velma married Jennings in August of 1970, and she moved in with him and his teenage daughter, Nancy. Things turned sour between Jennings and Velma pretty quickly, though, because she was still very much addicted to pills. A couple of months into their marriage, Velma actually overdosed, and Jennings had to take her to the hospital. So after that, he got mad, and they separated, but Velma convinced him that she would stop taking so many pills, so they got back together. Unfortunately, Velma wasn't able to stick to her word, and she overdosed yet again. This, of course, put a further strain on the marriage, and there were talks that they might get divorced. Before that came to pass, though, Tragedy struck yet again for Velma because in March of 1971, Jennings died, apparently from heart failure. After his death, Velma slipped further into her depression and she leaned even more heavily into her addiction. At any given time, she said that she had 2 or 3 different doctors writing her prescriptions for pills, and of course none of the doctors knew that the other ones were also providing pills for her. Velma ended up losing her job because she was performing so poorly because she was addicted to the drugs, and she had to move back in with her parents again. When she did, she learned that her father, Murphy, had lung cancer, and he died not too much longer after that. After his death, Velma started arguing more with her mother, Lily. Velma felt like Lily was always just ordering her around like when she was a kid, and Lily didn't like how many pills Velma was always taking. Since Velma wasn't making very much money, she began forging checks as a way to pay for her addiction. In March of 1972, she was arrested for forging a prescription, but she ended up being let off with pretty much just a fine. In 1974, Velma's mom, Lily, got really sick. She felt terrible pains in her stomach, and Velma had to take her to the hospital. Luckily, Lily was able to recover, and Velma took her home. Things were going well until Lily noticed something weird regarding her finances, and then after that, lo and behold, she ended up getting that same stomach flu again, but this time she was not able to recover and sadly passed away. In early 1975, the law caught up with Velma again, and this time she ended up serving 3 months in jail for check fraud. When she got out, she got a job as a live-in caretaker for an elderly couple. They were Montgomery and Dolly Edwards. Montgomery was 94 years old, so he had a whole slew of health issues. Dolly was only 84 years old, but she still required some help. After Montgomery died in 1977, Velma still stayed on with Dolly to continue helping her. Those two did not get along very well, though, and after a while, Dolly started to get sick. She thought that she had the stomach flu because she had terrible pain in her stomach, she was vomiting, and also had diarrhea. Dolly went to the hospital, but was not able to recover from her mysterious illness and unfortunately passed away. So after that, Velma was jobless again, but she soon found another elderly couple to take care of, and they were John Henry Lee and his wife, Record. After Velma had been working for them for a while, Record discovered that someone had forged a check in her name. John called the cops, but they were never able to figure out who it was that had forged the check. After that, John began to suffer from the same mysterious stomach disease that plagued so many in Velma's life. It was touch and go for him for a while, but he eventually succumbed and passed away. After John's death, Velma moved in with her new boyfriend, a man named Stuart Taylor. Stuart was a relative of Dolly Edwards. Velma really liked Stuart, but old habits die hard and addiction is tough. So she began forging checks in Stuart's name as well. So one day, Stuart got them tickets to see a famous preacher. So he drove himself and Velma out to go watch him speak. When they got there, though, Stuart started to feel really sick. His stomach was hurting a lot, so he went back to the car and decided to just lay down in the back of the car until the preacher was done. Once the evangelist was finished, Velma came out to the car and found Stuart still in a ton of pain. So she drove him home, and when they got there, he started vomiting. After a couple more days of suffering, Stuart also passed away. Hey. It just wouldn't be the same without you. I see you looking at my yarn, though. I think those are less than pure thoughts in your head. So Velma drove Stuart back home, and he started vomiting and just got worse and worse from there. After a few more days of him suffering, he also unfortunately passed away. Since his death was so sudden, kind of just out of the blue, his kids decided to have him autopsied, and that is how they discovered that Stuart had been poisoned. After Stuart's funeral, the police got a phone call that they at first thought was a prank call. It was this woman, and she was just hysterical, telling them that Stuart had been murdered and that they needed to stop whoever was doing it. At that time, police didn't really know what to do about that caller, and I don't think they had the autopsy reports yet back from Stuart. So that mysterious caller ended up calling back again, but this time she was more coherent. She told police that they needed to look into Velma regarding Stuart's death because too many people around Velma had just died in mysterious ways. The caller said she didn't have any proof, but she knew that it was true because she was Velma's sister. So police did end up arresting Velma for Stuart's death, and once she was arrested, she ended up confessing to having killed Stuart, her own mother Lily, Dolly Edwards, and John Lee. Velma at first tried to deny that she had killed her second husband, Jennings Barfield. However, they had his body exhumed, and when they did that, they found traces of arsenic in his system. So Velma ended up being convicted for the murder of Stuart Taylor, and since that murder took place after the death penalty had been reinstated in North Carolina, Velma was sentenced to death. When that happens, the prisoner usually files a bunch of appeals and ends up living for quite a while on death row. And that was no different in Velma's case. While she was waiting on her appeals, she became known as the Death Row Granny. She spent a lot of time mentoring some of the younger prisoners. She finally was able to get off drugs, and she crocheted stuff for her grandchildren. Velma also seemed to deeply regret the things that she had done and became a born-again Christian. So before her death, her son, Ron, asked her if she had killed his father, her first husband, Thomas Burke. Velma told him that her memory was fuzzy, but she thinks that she probably did. Probably. After her appeals kept getting rejected, Velma decided to just let it go and die with dignity. She chose to die via lethal injection, and her last meal was cheese doodles, which I think are like Cheetos, and a bottle of Coke. So with Velma, it seems like her problems pretty much all started when she got addicted to those pain pills, because that is where her behavior really started to deviate. She started forging checks and eventually progressed to killing the people that she was defrauding because she thought that they were going to find out what she was doing. But that also kind of makes me wonder, like, what was the point of killing them? Was it just to avoid a jail, to not get caught? I don't really understand why she had to kill them. At first she said that it was just an accident. She didn't mean to kill them. She only wanted to poison them to knock them out for a while so that they wouldn't notice that she was stealing. But that seems pretty fishy, suspicious to me. Because she had multiple poisoning victims, so I think you could maybe possibly use that logic for her second husband, Jennings. But after that, it just doesn't make sense because you would think she'd know exactly how much she would need for them to die or just be sick. And that especially goes out the window for her mom, who got sick for a while, then recovered completely, and then eventually ended up getting sick again and dying. That one almost seems like Velma was going to poison her and then changed her mind and decided to let her live, and then in the end ended up changing her mind again and deciding to kill her. But who knows? It kind of seemed like she was just poisoning people who were in her way of either furthering her addiction or just annoyed her. So yep, that is Velma Barfield for you. This is how far I got today on the little Stash Buster blankie. I absolutely love these colors together, and I think I'm gonna add one more color, but you will have to tune in next time to see which one that is. And as always, I will link my Etsy shop down below so you can check out what I have available, like that sweater. Hope you had a good time hanging out with me today, and on your way out, go ahead and give me a little like and a subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye now.